Well, hi, Darla. I'm very pleased to see you this evening in the UK. It's afternoon for you in the USA, and it's great to see you because we haven't seen each other for some time.
No, it's been a while, Elspeth. It's really nice to see you again too.
So, obviously, people will know your work in intercultural competence, intercultural communication, all of those things. And I know you've recently been working on various projects, but one in particular for UNESCO. And I think you said when we were talking about what we were going to discuss, you said that one of the key things for the moment is thinking about bridging divides. And obviously, we're in a very difficult moment in history in all kinds of ways. Um, and so the importance,
Absolutely.
yeah, the importance of intercultural communication in all of this is going to be really vital. So maybe you want to start with talking about that.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, intercultural competence has always been important, but it seems like now more so than ever, with what we're seeing happening both in my country in the United States, but then also around the world,
Mm.
um, there are so many divides right now in society. And looking at how can we as international educators help bridge those divides? What can we do more intentionally to not just bring people together, but to really help empower those to take action? And then, at least from what we're seeing here in the United States, also what can we do to address systemic racism? That it's kind of a both and approach, that on the individual level, about how can we bridge divides individually and not just cross border, but also with those within our societies, within our countries, whether that is racism or socioeconomic divides, political divides, even generational divides. What can we do on an individual level to try to go beyond an us versus them approach? And then also, what can we do at an organizational level to address systemic racism that is just inherent in the policies and structures that are there, put in place by those in power.
Yeah.
So I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to really look at how to address this at all levels.
Well, you've said a whole load of really interesting things there. I think that first of all, the fact that we talk about intercultural competence, and it is very much about, it doesn't have to be international. So I think it's really worth stressing that, as you just did. Um, Now, and I know that you have this kind of, normally have this very optimistic outlook on the world, as do I. And I think it's for those of us who have that kind of tendency, it's a particularly difficult time. And you know, the work that you've done on intercultural competence, this is the UNESCO project that you've been working on, manual for developing intercultural competences, and talking about story circles. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Darla?
Sure, I'm really excited about this project, and I really think it does have some of that potential to bridge divides at the individual level. The book you just held up was just launched at the end of last year in December in Paris at UNESCO. It is open access, so anyone can download it for free, and it's available in multiple languages, including in French and Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and of course English. Um, and UNESCO has been working on, I've been working with them on this project for the last couple of years. It started off as UNESCO was looking at a very concrete, practical tool for developing intercultural competence that could be used with any group of people anywhere in the world using little to no resources. And that could be facilitated by someone who may not have a formal training or background in intercultural communication or intercultural competence. Well, for those of us who do intercultural training, such as yourself and others, if you know, in thinking about the different methodologies we use, it's really challenging to think about, well, what kind of tool could fit those parameters.
Mm.
And in fact, I had done a prior book with a colleague, Kate Berardo. We, in 50 some different activities for developing intercultural competence. Very few of those, actually none of them really fit these parameters from UNESCO. And so as we went to work on this and researched and looked to see what was out there, what really came up was something that's been around as long as humans have been around, and that's sharing stories.
Mm.
And so story circles evolved. It's not necessarily new, but it is new in the way we're using it uh, to practice intercultural competence. And circles are used for lots of different purposes, but this is the first time it's been used specifically for this purpose. And so what evolved was a very structured, yet adaptable process that indeed does work with many groups of people all over the world. And in fact, UNESCO piloted it in all 5 UNESCO regions. And of those 5 pilots, only one was in a formal learning setting. That was in a middle school in Vienna that was about 90% migrant background. And 2 of those 5 were literally outside under trees in Zimbabwe and in Costa Rica. So it was so exciting to see how well this does work and how it connects people and how it's not just head knowledge. And this is, I think, the really powerful part about this. It's not just training people to talk about difference or understand a different perspective, but it also really connects people at the heart level. And they begin to see, even though we are so different from each other, we have a lot in common. And so that's been the really exciting part
Mm.
to see through all this.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people talk about the power of stories, don't they, and giving examples. And I think once you get to a level of um, individual to individual as well, it's a much more powerful situation than simply describing some of these issues, which is, I guess, as academics, we're doing that a lot, aren't we? And do we ever, the extent to which we see it through and actually see the results of what we're talking about, it's a great opportunity for you, isn't it, to have people use this in that way.
Absolutely. And I've used it myself in my teaching. I often use story circles at the beginning of a course, and it really brings students together in ways that just, hi, my name is, doesn't quite cut it. And they keep referencing that experience throughout the whole semester. We've also used it during orientations. For example, at Duke University, it was used at a graduate orientation in bringing domestic and international students together. And a lot of them came out of that saying, wow, I feel like I have friends now, and I didn't expect that coming into this orientation today. So
Mm.
it can be really impactful in so many different ways. And of course, the examples I've given have been face to face. And now, just this spring, UNESCO and I are working on piloting this virtually. And I've already used this in one global health course at Duke University with master students. And it worked reasonably well. Of course, it's not quite the same as the face-to-face powerful impact that it can have, but it worked reasonably well. And now UNESCO is looking at collaborating with UNHCR to look at how can we use this in training UN staff who work with refugees and vulnerable populations. And so this can be used in lots of different settings, including virtually now, to really try to connect people in deeper and more meaningful ways
Mm.
than often I think we as academics tend to do in our higher education settings.
I think the one of the issues is, and you will have experienced this in the same way as I have. We're always talking to the converted, aren't we? We're talking to people who feel the same way about these things as we do, largely the ones who bother to turn up to our presentations or read the things that we write. And it's going back to the very first things you were talking about, bridging the divides. It's actually um, really trying to get to people who wouldn't normally share our views, as it were. That's the real challenge, I think, isn't it? And I wonder whether this sort of approach is going to help to move that forward.
Yes, absolutely. That's been one of my burning questions all along is how do we get this quote intercultural competence work out to the masses, out to those who will never set foot in a workshop or a webinar or what have you, as you said, and how do we go beyond the converted? That has been a kind of a driving question for me all along, and that's what I'm so excited about with this UNESCO project, because this intercultural methodology is indeed meant for anyone. And so, for example, um, in Costa Rica, we were the context. So here, it's not just a intercultural competence for the sake of intercultural competence, but really looking at to what end and looking at a context. So in Costa Rica, it was in the context of indigenous and marginalized peoples.
Mm.
In Tunisia, it was working with youth activists who want to change their society.
Mm.
And that was so incredibly inspiring. So and I know in Zimbabwe, they've taken this methodology out across the country and working with lots of different types of people within the country. So it can be used kind of in the community with others who may not sign up to do some sort of
Mm.
formal training, so to
Mm.
speak.
Yeah, I guess in a way I've always kind of thought there are three different groups. You've got the people who are already committed and just want to know how to do it. You've got then another group that we will never reach, I think, and they're the ones that are, often causing the real problems in society. Then there's a group in the middle that we can perhaps reach in the ways that you've been talking about here. I don't know if we will ever actually get across to some of those people who, well, things going on in your country, in mine, all around the world, as you say. I just don't know how you reach those people who just view otherization as they scapegoat people, they scapegoat individuals and groups of people. I don't know if we'll ever solve that.
No, but if we can try to meet them where they are at, I think is really important. And even just if we can get to the point where we see each other as neighbors, and not a us versus them, and especially not demonizing or vilifying
Mm.
others, which seems to be happening so much. But if we can begin to see each other as both local and, of course, global neighbors, and what does that mean um, to engage with our neighbors in ways that are positive and that build up as opposed to tear down. And of course, there are different ideologies around loving one's neighbor, including going back to Confucius, talked about the importance of loving one's neighbor. And then as we do that, it's not enough. It's not about talking about, intercultural competence, this or that, or frameworks or definitions of blah, blah, blah. But it's just, how do we respond to each other? How do we approach each other as fellow humans on this earth? And how can we be better neighbors to each other? So maybe that might be a way of meeting others where they're at.
And maybe perhaps those of us who, share a particular worldview need to try harder to understand the perspectives of the people who are really at odds with the way we think. And, the political divides around the world make this very, very difficult, don't they, at the moment? It's a very bad time we're living through.
It does. And you're absolutely right. If we can really not just react like, oh, I can't believe this person said this, which often happens in my country, with certain people,
I'm here.
to really kind of step back and say, approach it out of wonder. I wonder why this person is saying what he or she is, and what's underneath that. What is there, an underlying fear? What is that fear? Trying to understand where they're coming from, and then looking at what is the best way to meet them where they're at, and then try to build from there. It's certainly challenging work. It's hard work. It's definitely needs much more than just talk. We need to take action. We need to build deeper relationships with each other, and then at the individual level. And then we need to be, as we're hearing increasingly in this country, my country, we need to be anti-racist. We need to look at and really question systems and structures and policies, and what can we do through all of that to try to help build a better world for everyone, not just for those in power.
Yeah, I mean, we know what things that are happening in the States, but it would be a mistake to imagine that's the only place where we have problems in the world. So yeah, but it's really good to hear you talk about it so optimistically, Darla. It's good to have that sort of optimism, I think. But thanks so much for taking the time to talk about your project with UNESCO, and for taking the time to talk to me today.
Sure, it's been a pleasure. It's been so wonderful to see you again, Elspeth. Thanks so much for this conversation.
You too, Darla. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Take care.